What's up, guys? My name is Christian. I'm a professional Roblox developer. I've been working on Roblox Studio for I don't know, like 9 years now. I decided I would start a channel just to show you guys how to make some cool things, and I mean for myself mostly, because I've I've gotten to the point where I know how to make all this cool stuff, and I want to show everyone how to make it. So that's why I started this channel. Um, yeah. In this video, I'm gonna be showing you guys how to make a drawing pad. So what I mean by a drawing pad is if you guys have ever used MS Paint, actually let me just show you guys. Alright, this is MS Paint, and if you guys have ever used MS Paint, it's I mean, in case you guys have never used MS Paint, it's a software that lets you draw stuff on it, basically. So you have this brush tool, you can click and you can draw whatever you want. And we're gonna be making this on Roblox. We're gonna be making a 2D, not a 3D one. I might make a 3D one later, but for now I'm gonna focus on 2D because that's like the basis of this whole drawing thing. So yeah, let's get started on that. Alright, in part 1 we're mostly gonna be focusing on user input, because in order for this to even work in the first place, we need some way to detect user input, like when the mouse button has been pressed, or like when you move the mouse. We need to detect all that. So let's do that. We can start by adding a screen GUI to starter GUI, and we're gonna name this drawing pad. Well, I'm gonna name it drawing pad. You can name it whatever you want. And then we're gonna put a frame in here to block the background, because we don't want to. I don't want to see this base plate in the background. So let me name this background, and I'll resize it. And now we have ourselves a background. This should be 0. Alright, and then let's put another frame in here, and we'll name this drawing pad frame. And this is going to be the frame where we actually draw stuff. So let's resize this. I'm going to resize it to 0.75, 0, 0.50. And then we're going to put it in the middle of the screen. There we go. And now we have the basis of the GUI. Should have this screen GUI, this background, and then another frame inside this background frame. Usually when we're making a game, we don't want to put the scripts inside this screen GUI, but just for this tutorial, I'm gonna go ahead and put every script inside the screen GUI just to make it easy. So let's get started on the actual scripts themselves. For user input, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make a module script whose sole purpose is just to detect input and send signals to other scripts. So let's make a module script. I'm gonna name this user input, and let's get started on the actual code part. Alright, to start off the script, I went ahead and added UserInputService. I added some headers, so like this API thing, so I could put all the functionality of this module script. And I put the description. So detects user input and sends signals to other scripts, which is what I said before. And I went ahead and added these two bindable events right here, because what this is going to do is we have this table right here, and we're going to make these two bindable events, and these bindable events are going to be fired every time this script detects that the first mouse button has been pressed. The first mouse button is the left mouse button. So that's like the mouse button you would press to activate any tool you're using in Roblox. So let's keep it consistent and use the left mouse button. And I'm going to make user input activated equal to the event of that bindable event, so that every time the event is fired, we can easily get that signal by using user input activated. So let's do activated bindable event. And then let's do the same for the deactivated bindable. Deactivated equals deactivated bindable event. Alright. And So now we want to actually detect the user input, and we can do that by making the three main functions, which are going to be input began, local function input began. Oh, it automatically does that. Okay, local function input change, and then we have local function input ended. And these are the main functions used in UserInputService to detect input. And these all of these three functions have these parameters. So they have an input object, which describes the type of input that just happened, and then we also have a sunk parameter. Well, technically it's called game processed event, which does exactly what this variable is called. Like it tells you whether another process inside this game has already detected this input and done something with it. So like, let's say you're typing in the chat and you move forward, like you press W to move forward while you're typing. You don't want to move forward in the game while you're typing. So that's what this is here for, if that makes any sense. Now we want to add these parameters to all the other functions, because they all have the same exact parameters. And now we can begin on the actual code. Alright, so I added these two functions called activate and deactivate, and these are going to be like the main activation and deactivation functions. Then I also added this active variable and this delta variable, and this active variable will tell the user whether the left mouse button is being pressed or if it's let go. So if it's being pressed, active is going to be true, and if it's let go, active is going to be false. This delta here is going to tell us how much of a difference the mouse position has. So like, let's say we have the mouse position here and we move the mouse all the way over here. The delta is going to be the difference between these two mouse positions. So we got to make sure we have this so we could tell where the mouse is going to be, or where the mouse is at all times. And we also want to have like an enable thing. So let's say we want to disable the user input in general. We can just do local enabled. Let's make it false for now, and let's add a function that actually enables it. So let's do function user input dot set enabled. Enabled is going to be the parameter, and we just set enabled equals enabled. Let's make this underscore so that these two variables are different, and then we'll do if enabled does not equal, or if it's equal to enabled, then we'll do nothing. Alright, this should set it enabled and disabled. In the activate function, we want to check if this whole system is already active. So let's do if active, then we do nothing, because we don't want to set something to active when it's already active. So we do active equals true, and then we also fire this activated bindable fired. We also want to add an initial position, and it's going to be a vector2, and we'll just add that to this so that when this bindable event gets fired, it sends the initial position as its first parameter. And then we'll do something similar for the deactivate. So if not active, then we do nothing, because why deactivate something that's already deactivated? We do active equals false, and then we do deactivated bindable fire. And we don't need anything in the parameters of this function because we're just deactivating it. Alright, we also need to be able to get whether this is active or it's enabled. So let's add some getter functions for those variables. So let's do function UserInput.isActive boolean, and all this does is return that active variable. So return active. We'll also have function UserInput.isEnabled boolean, and this just returns the enabled variable. Alright, so we have is active, is enabled, and set enabled. We also need to return this delta, so let's add a function for that. So let's do function UserInput.getDelta. That'll return a vector2, and all we do here is return delta. And then let's also add a function to reset this delta value back to 0. So let's do function UserInput.resetDelta. That does nothing but make delta equal to vector2 dot 0. Alright. Now we can begin on these three functions right here, these input functions. To make this easier, I'm going to change GameProcessEvent to sunk. And they basically do the same thing. I'm just changing the name of this variable. And we're also going to do if sunk, then return. Because if something else is already dealt with the input, we don't want to deal with it again. Then return. We're going to do it on all three functions. And now we want to see what type of input this input object has. So we'll do if input object dot user input type equals enum dot user input type dot mouse button 1 then. And what this is basically saying is if the input was the mouse button 1 being pressed, the mouse button 1 is the left mouse button. If that button is being pressed, then whatever's in here is gonna do its thing. So what do we want to happen if the player presses the left mouse button? Well, we want to activate this whole thing, so we're going to call this function activate, and we're also going to put in the position of the mouse. So we're going to do input object. Remember, this has to be a vector2 value, so we're going to add a variable right here called position. Let's name it initial position. And we're going to do initial position equals input object dot position dot, let's do vector2 dot new input object dot position dot x and input object dot position dot y. Let's put that inside here, and then we can put initial position into the arguments of this function call, and that should activate it. Now to deactivate it, all we have to do is something similar to this, but now we don't even need the initial position. So if input object, oh, this is input changed, put it in here. So if input object dot user input type equals enum dot user input type dot mouse button 1, then deactivate, and that should deactivate. Now we have this here, input changed. So the thing about UserInputService is it doesn't detect any change, or it won't give you any delta for that user input unless you set the mouse behavior of the mouse to either stay at the position it's at or center it in the middle. And I don't know why it does that, but it just does. So let's do that here. So when we activate the mouse, we want to do UserInputService dot mouse behavior enum dot mouse behavior dot lock current position. And that should lock the mouse. And when we deactivate it, we got to set it back to its default. So let's do UserInputService.mouseBehavior enum.mouseBehavior.default. That should set it back to default when you deactivate the mouse. Now, using a script to test whether this user input module actually works, we can add these three functions. So let's do render step, tool deactivated, and tool activated. And these functions are basically going to be called whenever the signals inside this user input table are fired. So we can connect these functions to those events by doing UserInput.activated connect, and then we do tool activated. Then UserInput.deactivated connect, tool deactivated. And right here we can print, just to make sure these work, we could do print activated at position, and then we'll add the initial position, because remember we had a parameter right here that gets sent through that signal, so it's a vector2 value, and we put initial position here, and then here we can just print deactivated. This render step function is going to be called whenever this run service whenever the run service is stepped on the client. So we can do run service dot render step connect render step. And actually, instead of this, let's use run service dot bind to render step, and then we'll do tool drawing pad tool render step, and then we'll do enum.render priority dot input dot value, and then we'll do render step here. Now let's also set this green GUI to ignore GUI inset so we don't see that annoying top bar here, and let's test out this module. I actually just realized I forgot to connect these three functions to UserInputService, so let's actually do that. We'll do UserInputService dot input began connect input began UserInputService dot input ended, or let's do input change first, connect input change, and then UserInputService dot input ended connect input ended. Whoops. Now we can go ahead and test this. And you can see that now when we click the mouse button, the left mouse button, it says activated at the position you activated the mouse at, and when you let go it says deactivated, and that's exactly what we wanted to do. So now let's make this actually detect the position when I move the mouse, because right now it just doesn't do anything when I move the mouse. Alright, so to detect input from the mouse when you move the mouse, you're going to want to go to this input change function here. And similar to what we did in input began and input ended, we're going to check the user input type of the input object. So if input object dot user input type is equal to enum dot mouse, no, we'll do user input type dot mouse movement, then, and right here let's make a variable called delta, because we're going to be adding this delta to this delta here. So actually let's do delta position, and then we'll make this delta position equal to vector2 dot new, and then we'll do input object dot delta dot x and input object dot delta dot y. And we'll put this inside of this conditional statement here, and we'll also, I think that's actually all we have to do. Delta position equals this, and then we add it to the delta, so delta plus equals delta position. Oh, we also need to check if this is activated, so if active, then we'll do if not active, because if the tool is not active at the moment, then we don't need to add this delta at all, so let's just do return. Alright, and now if it's active, we should get input change whenever the input's changed, of course. And then we can test it by adding that to render step in the LocalScript. So remember, we have this LocalScript here in user input. User input is a module script, LocalScript is a local script. So let's do local active. We don't even need active. Let's do local delta equals user input dot get delta, and then now we have the delta. So if delta is equal to vector 2.0, then return, because that means there hasn't been any change. But if it's not, then we can print that change. So we'll do mouse move to position, and let's add a variable here called initial position. This will be a vector 2 value, but it could also be nil. Alright, so we have this initial position right here when the tool is activated, and we'll set this initial position variable to this. So we'll do, instead of calling it initial position to avoid confusing these two, we'll name it position activated at. And we'll do position activated at equals initial position. And when it's deactivated, we'll set position activated at to nil. Nil. Now here, if we do if position activated at equals nil, then return, because this function's not going to do anything if the tool isn't activated. So when we have this delta not equal to 0, we can add the delta to the current position. So we'll just add it to this. Oh, actually, let's name this current position. That's a better name for it. Current position. So if current position equals nil, we do nothing, but if it's not nil, then it'll do this. We get the delta. If delta is equal to 0, then we do nothing. But if it's not, we add it to the current position. Plus equals delta. And then we'll do mouse move to position, and we'll print the current position. And then we'll reset the delta value inside this user input table. So we'll do user input dot reset delta. We can do that right after getting it. So we get the delta, we reset it, and then we add it to the current position. Alright, so now we can go ahead and test this. And now you can see when I click my mouse, it says activated at the position I activated at, and when I move it, it'll tell you when I move the mouse. And it'll tell you what position the mouse is at. That's exactly what we wanted it to do. And then now we can let go and it'll say deactivated. And that's the end of this. That should be the end of this, actually. Because all we wanted was a user input module, and we got that. We can enable it, disable it. One more thing, actually. Okay, so this enable thing right here, it should only work. This thing should only work if this user input is enabled. So let's do, let's add that to these functions right here. This active and deactivate, activate and deactivate. So if not enabled, then return. But for the deactivate, we don't really need to have this enabled, so let's not add it to this, because we can still deactivate this if this is enabled or disabled. Doesn't matter. So we only really need it on activate. And now let's not forget to add a call to the function that sets this user input table to enabled. So let's do set enabled, and then we'll do true. And that way this script should still work. So let's test it. And it still works. So that means we got everything done now. For sure, like for sure this time. Alright, so that's the end of the video. We got this user input module done. And this is used to detect input from the player, like when they use their mouse. So like, let's say they press the left mouse button, it'll detect that signal and activate this. And when they move their mouse, it should also detect that movement and send it to whatever script needs to detect that. And then when you let go of the mouse, it'll also send that signal. So yeah, that's the end of this video. leave a like and subscribe if this helped you out. I'm gonna be making a part 2 on this. This is only part 1, and this is like one of the more like important parts of this series, so it's important we get this done. All right, yeah, thanks for watching, guys. Bye.